Hi Sandra, welcome back to the Healing After Infant Loss YouTube channel. I interviewed you recently talking about your journey through infant loss and then being childless not by choice. So thank you so much for coming back and for talking to us more about this topic.
Thanks so much for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So, cool.
I have 10 questions that I'm going to ask you, and obviously we're going to be talking about lots of different things in between. The first question is, what is childless not by choice, and how does that differ from somebody being child-free?
So, the kind of the brief answer then is in there in a way, because childless not by choice, it wasn't a choice. So versus child free or childless by choice would be the thing. So what basically that normally means, and there's never really, it's kind of like a line as well, because it can be varying degrees, but the person wanted to have a child and wasn't able to have a child. Now that can be like us, because they had a infant loss, pregnancy loss, or something like that. Or, there's a million different paths to becoming childless, not by choice. I have some clients who developed chronic health things in their, like when they were 19, 20, for example, and were never able to have a child because their body, basically, they couldn't even try to have a child. Other people, similar to part of my story, you'll find that a lot of this is really layered. And when you look at anybody's story, there's lots of layers and things in it. But similar to my story, but didn't meet, their husband at 39, was they just never found the right partner, or they were in a partnership that was abusive, and they thought, I'd love to have a child, but I'm taking contraception because I can't bring a child into this relationship, and have them suffer the way that I'm suffering, or whatever. Financial reasons, there's a million different reasons as to why people, don't have, so they might want to have children, but they can't afford to have children, they can't afford to have fertility treatments. But on one scale or another, the person wanted to have a child and wasn't able to have a child. So, that's the difference. Whereas somebody who's child free, is then somebody who has made a choice at their own will not to have children. Now, the child-free people will shoot me down as I say this, so this definitely doesn't apply to everybody. But some of that, sometimes people convert from being child-free to childless at a later age. So, for example, I have people who maybe are in their 60s, 50s, 60s, who then never tried to have a child, but then discover it was because of their childhood traumas that they never wanted to have a child. And once, they go into therapy and they deal with those childhood traumas, they're like, shit, I missed out on having children. This would have been a beautiful gift. So it's really, there's a very black and white piece, and then there's a piece in the centre where, it's then, I have some friends, for example, who I found it super weird because, I've been working on this for 5 years, and yet we haven't really had conversations around it. And finally I was like, I find it really weird that I have deep conversations with people about this all the time and we haven't chatted about it, and she's like, yeah, she's really on the border between both of them. She just never found the right person. She would have liked to have a child, but it wasn't the whole thing for her, sort of type thing. So it's then, so she's really, in that grey area between the two. But yeah, for us who are childless not by choice, it's a deep grief. So, those of us who are in that clear box of classifying themselves as childless not by choice, it kind of feels like a birthright in a way has been snatched away from us, that we had this ability, or everybody was born with the ability to have a child, or certainly I'm projecting my beliefs a little bit into this now, and that wasn't possible for whatever reason. So yeah, it's then, and as I sort of kind of tried to represent there, there's many doorways into it. But I think something that's important about being childless not by choice as well is it's an ongoing and an evolving grief, sometimes referred to as a living loss. So you have the physical loss, as we did, of basically losing our children, losing our pregnancy, not being successful. For those who never had the chance to be pregnant, they had the physical loss of, never actually experiencing pregnancy as well. So, there's all of this kind of physical bit there that happens really at that moment. But if you think about more of the social losses, for example, perhaps for some people it was important that then, I don't know, that having a child, I'm a foreigner, for example, having a child for me would have been a way to make more friends. It would have been a way to have those relationships at the school gates and things. But that evolves throughout your life. It's not just always, about meeting people at school. It's about then your child growing up and having, their graduation ceremony or their wedding, or them then going on to have children. So it evolves kind of throughout our life in a way, and that's why we would refer to it as a living loss in some ways as well. So, but it's a very diverse experience. It's something, money can buy you some more choices and more options, but there's no guarantee with those. So, it impacts every race, gender, and, across that social scale, as well as to different financial capacities, let's say. So, I don't know if I've then went too deep already, but
no, it's amazing. Like, I think with childless not by choice, and from talking to you last time, my kind of assumption was that it's people who get pregnant or try and get pregnant, lose the pregnancy, don't get pregnant, and then that's why, they tried, and now they are childless not by choice because they tried, and I don't want to say failed, but tried and it didn't work.
Isn't successful for them.
I hadn't even thought, unsuccessful, thank you, that's the better word. I hadn't even thought of people that, financially it's not available, or if they're in an abusive relationship and they can't quite escape and they don't want that for their children, and like you said as well about the, childhood trauma things, I hadn't even thought of that. I just automatically thought, okay, it's people who tried to get pregnant, didn't work for whatever reason, now they are childless not by choice. I hadn't even thought of all the different scenarios that can happen.
And it's interesting that you're saying that, because that's then how the whole world see it as well, as well, that then we who have had a pregnancy loss, in a way, have a, God, this is horrible to say, I don't know what the right word is, not an advantage, because who wants to go through that? It's not an advantage in a way. But there's a bit in this world where nobody really, in our Western world, where nobody really knows how to handle grief, we get a little bit of an extra allowance that we've had this loss, for those that know about it. Most of the time it's a secret and whatever. Those, not a secret, but we just don't go shouting it out to the world. Well, you and I do, but most people, most people don't. So, but for education purposes, of course, they are. Those who haven't even had that feel even more disenfranchised. The world just doesn't see their grief. You never even try to have there's so many things out there. Why didn't you try? Why didn't you just buy your way through it? Why didn't you just, you didn't have a partner, well, just go get drunk one night and have random sex with somebody, and you get pregnant. That's how it happens. There's even more of those silly comments that come out for those that then, for whatever reason, weren't able to try, or tried and weren't able to get pregnant. I know people who've went through IVF like thousands and thousands, well, not thousands of times, obviously that's an exaggeration, but lots and lots of times, and just for whatever reason they couldn't get pregnant, and the science isn't always as helpful as we would like it to be, sort of type thing. So there's lots and lots of pathways into this. What we have in common is we wanted a child and we don't have it. So that's when our grief comes together and unites and says, okay, I'm living a life without this part that I expected to have. That's
I guess, kind of like you said, I guess people who maybe have had a pregnancy or done IVF or whatever it is, and then for whatever reason it's unsuccessful, I guess they get a lot more empathy and sympathy, like, oh, you really tried, oh, you lost this thing, oh, you saw a pregnancy test, and then like whatever it is. Whereas, like you said, people who maybe financially can't afford it, maybe they've been in situations or whatever it is, they don't have that kind of proof, I guess, of trying. And I don't know if I'm completely saying the wrong thing here,
No.
so please excuse
Yep.
me if I
No,
am,
no.
but I guess you must get a lot more sympathy and empathy if it's like, oh, we lost 3 pregnancies and now we're childless not by choice, versus somebody who,
Yeah. I would say as
I'm not saying like
well,
they're not trying, but it's such an interesting, like,
but we live in this world where productivity and how much effort have you put into something, if you haven't put any effort in, and this is like a self-concept for many of us as well, it's like, oh God, did I try hard enough? What's the thing? Why didn't I meet a right partner? Why couldn't I get my health fixed? Why couldn't I get over that trauma? Why couldn't I? And there's a lot of self blames or more what ifs and things like that in those scenarios as well. So, at least 50% of my clients are childless by, we'll put in another term just to kind of mix it up, childless by circumstances. So the circumstances of not finding a relationship, not having the right health, not having the right finances, I don't know, whatever else, whatever other, as I say, there's millions of other reasons that can go in there, and a million varieties that then, as to why they weren't able to have children. And those circumstances can also be infertility. So, you can, but yeah, some people prefer that childless by circumstances phrase as well. So,
yeah.
so, yeah.
So I have a question that isn't on my list. I've had 4 infant losses, and I'm 37 next month in April. So at the moment, I'm childless not by choice, but I'm also not persisting. I'm not doing IVF. I'm not trying to get pregnant. I'm not trying to adopt. I'm not trying to do any of these things. So I sort of struggle with this thing because I'm sort of childless not by choice, but I'm also sort of child free because there is more I could be doing. But at the moment, I'm like, I don't think I want that for myself anymore, even though I tried 4 times and it was unsuccessful. But it puts me in a really weird situation because I feel like a lot of the time with infertility, we're told, oh, just keep trying, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Yep.
And oftentimes you don't want to spend the money, you don't want to use your energy or your resources. Like, I would rather at the minute be traveling the
And
world using my money. Yeah, like
we've been through a
all
hell
of
of an
this.
experience that sometimes we just say that's enough.
Yeah. So I'm sort of I feel like you said, that person, I'm sort of in between of like, yes, I am childless not by choice because I tried 4 times, it was unsuccessful and it was heartbreaking. But then also I'm not doing anything actively to have more children. I don't think I want children in the future. So I'm sort of in this like
Yep.
weird,
You
it's so
always,
nuanced. I think the
you
whole
always,
thing is so nuanced.
you always get to pick the label that feels right for you. But sometimes people in your situation call themselves child free after infertility, to kind of give the
Okay.
side of both, or child free after infant loss, if that's the, but child free after something is then, so I made a choice not to have children after I've been through this part. So it's kind of not negating either part of your journey in a way. So that double-barreled name in some way might be the thing that feels most comfortable for you. So yeah, because it then kind of
Yeah, I think that makes sense because, like you said, it sort of encompasses the infant loss without just brushing it off. But then it also means that I'm also making an active decision to not pursue that. So I think that's probably
yeah,
where I stand. But
yeah,
it's interesting because there's all these terms that you don't know about, and there's not many people talking about all these different things. So trying to like get your head around it and thinking, oh, well, am I that or am I that? And it doesn't matter what you
yeah,
label yourself. I think it's sometimes more of just like a self thing. Like, I'm probably not going to tell anybody like, oh, by the
yeah,
way, I'm childless after infertility, or I'm childless after infant loss, like whatever it is. I'm
yeah,
probably not going to go and tell people that, but I
yeah,
think just me knowing that internally just makes me feel a bit, I don't know, it's weird, isn't it?
yeah. But it's however it feels comfortable for you internally as well. It's then, and it's yeah. And I don't know that there is a perfect label. The childless. There's all this coaching stuff about less, why we feel worthless at some stage. Why put the word less in it? It means it. But, I don't know. It's such a big part of our journey that somehow to negate it feels wrong as well. So, child free, I'm free. Well, I didn't want the frigging freedom. So I wanted it, but now I didn't want it, but I'm appreciating it now. So, there's a lot of, yeah, I don't know if we came up with the right terminology yet, and
Yeah.
but it's pick whatever feels right for you. So, a mother without children, or these type of phrases and things that then you yeah. There's a million different phrases. Yeah, the way to find us on Google is childless not by choice or child free, and those are the kind of 2 things to say, because the The difference as well, one of the big differences when you were asking what was the difference, is that, to start with, those who are childless not by choice are going through a grief and a huge loss from not having that child, whereas those who are child free are celebrating that freedom and are screaming from the rooftops about that freedom. And early in our grief, those two things clash together, because it's like, hey, well, wait a minute, they never even tried, they're celebrating, they're whatever, and there can be a later on in the journey. We both don't have children, and we're facing some of the same challenges in life. But whilst that grief is raw, you probably don't want to be following child-free Instagram accounts and such likes, because it will probably rub you the wrong way to start with whilst you're grieving.
I'm going to jump to question number 10, because we're talking about this like childless thing, like you're lacking children, you don't have children. Mm-hmm. What do you do if somebody asks if you have children? Because I struggle with this.
So to be honest, I don't get asked very often. So it's difficult for me to answer this one because I don't get asked so often. I recently, so it's usually when you go into situations where you're new and people don't know you, is there where you. And the last time that happened to me was I joined a choir in September, but it was the same day as World Childless Week. So here I went into the hairdressers and they were asking, basically, hey, what are you up to today? Why are you getting your hair done? I was like, oh, I'm doing a presentation, a webinar on World Childless Week. And the same when I walked into the choir that night, they weren't asking me about children, but they asked more, what do I do? And then, there I was speaking to mothers around our journey sort of type things. So it really depends on who I'm speaking to and how I feel at that moment in time. So, somebody randomly, I bump into somebody I'm never going to see again on the train, then I'm probably not going to, share anything about, do you have children? No. Probably would be my answer. If I'm feeling confident, like I am those particular days, I'm doing this thing for World Childless Week, I want to spread the message and all of that type of stuff, then I proactively give the information as a part of kind of education and yeah. Whilst I was grieving, there was a pandemic, and I was in my stable environment where nobody was asking me this question, but there, if somebody had asked me, I probably wouldn't have had the ability to answer it in a good way. And, so I think it's really important to mention that as well, that this, there's no obligation to go out there and share your journey with everybody. So I think where it comes in more is something that I look at in some of my workshops is kind of like looking at your support, your circle, your support circle around you, and thinking who, and this is really different for our childless journey than it is for, I don't know, I'm having problems in my relationship and I want to speak to someone about that sort of type of thing. Who would I go to? My friends and my family and all of that type of stuff. But kind of thinking about who's your trusted circle and who's then in that in-between zone and who is, oh my God, I just can't speak to this person about this because they're never going to get it. They are, for whatever reason, not able to empathise with that. So I think it's important to think about, who is the person that you're speaking with. And in that in-between zone, saying, I don't know if this person's going to get it or not. Perhaps going out with a couple of, just a little bit of a tester question to start with, rather than sharing your whole story with them. But, it can be, just simply saying, unfortunately not, or I would have loved to have had children and it didn't happen for us, or whatever, something like that. It can be a little bit without sharing your whole story, and if the person runs away at that moment in time, okay, they're not ready for this. Whereas if they go, I'd love to know more about that, you can always kind of pause and say, well, we're at a barbecue, whatever, probably just now is not the time and place, but you'd like to go for a coffee one day, I'll happily share more with you, sort of type of thing. So it really depends on who the person is and what ongoing contact you're going to have with them. Again, a very long answer to a short question, but I think there is no rights and wrongs as well. So it depends how you're feeling, who it is, what stage you are in your journey, and whether you want to talk about this. But not everybody deserves to hear your story, so it's completely fine as well to say, unfortunately not, or just no, depending upon. And that sometimes feels weird for us to say no. But yeah, keep yourself safe, I think, is the kind of most important message out of that. So
It's a tough one. Like for me as well, I think because we're sort of, me and my husband are at the age where we could be having children. People often say like, "Oh, do you have kids?" And I sort of say, "No." Like, "Oh, okay. When you're planning on having kids, or when are you having kids?" And it's almost like an assumption in society that you have to have children, especially if you're married and whatever. Like, it's like, well, when are you having kids, and why don't you have kids? And I almost like, sometimes I just say, no, I don't have kids. But then sometimes if I'm feeling feisty, I'll be like,
bring it on,
actually,
I'm going to give you the answer.
since you asked the question, I've had 3 miscarriages and a late-term abortion due to medical issues. It was traumatic. It was awful. That happens. Maybe don't ask people if they have children. Like, I can get really like feisty with it because I think it's one of those questions that even I did when I was younger. I would ask people, like my friends, and oh, when are you guys planning on having kids? And it's just such an innocent, it feels like an innocent question. But for somebody who has experienced loss or is going through infertility or whatever, it's such a weighted question. And you never quite know how much to give and what to say. And it's like, it can be so tough.
Yeah, definitely. And, when you're going through that healing process, it can be really triggering as well. It's like, oh God, here I am trying to do something fun, like join a choir or whatever, as I did in my example sort of thing. If that was then and people were asking, it's like, oh God, please just, I want to do something and turn off the grief for a little while and do something fun or whatever. And there you are, just with a simple question, or people, speaking around pregnancy stories, or, what their toddler's up to or whatever. All of that can feel really triggering to start with.
I think the other one as well is doctor's appointments. If you have to fill out a form, like whatever, like a gynecology thing, and it's just like, how many children do you have? And I'm like, it is 0. But if you're asking how many pregnancies I've had for gynecological issues, like whatever, I've had 4, and I did give birth to my child at 26 weeks. But I don't have children. So I'm sometimes a bit like, well, what is the actual question you're asking here? Do I have children at home playing? No. Have I given birth? Yes. Have I had miscarriages? Yes. But that's not the question. So it's also sometimes a bit like blurred in terms of like, what information do you actually want to know versus like, or am I just thinking too deep about this? I don't know. But I find doctor's office sometimes, because you think, well, I need to tell them the truth, but I don't really understand what the question is.
Yeah. There's then a colleague of mine's called Gail Miller, sorry. Jane Miller was one of my boyfriend, my brother's ex-girlfriends. Gail Miller, who then basically also is a coach working in the childless not by choice area, and she's also a doctor. And she did a podcast. If it's okay, we can probably link it into notes afterwards. She did a podcast interview saying, hey, as a doctor, this is how I would answer these questions, and here's, the tips and hints I would give from being on both sides of that fence sort of type thing. So, the doctor's appointment things is really interesting, and that interview with Gail was an interesting one to listen to.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link that one. Okay, question number 2. We are chatty Cathys.
Yes, we are indeed.
When did you identify as childless not by choice, and how was that transition for you?
So I didn't know the terminology. I had stopped my... So I potentially could have classified myself as childless not by choice when, I wanted to have children and I hadn't met my husband. Permanently childless not by choice probably comes in when you are in the menopause, because then that choice is then... Well, most of the choices are away. Obviously, science does allow, other things to happen, whatever now. But for me personally, around 1 year after, we stopped our fertility treatments, and we had, basically we had a phone call from the doctor saying that I wasn't pregnant. I didn't know the terminology, so I wouldn't have labelled myself with that terminology. It was around 1 year afterwards I went on to a friend who had cancer, had said to me, hey, there was all these support groups and things on Facebook. Surely there's something for you too. I was like, yeah, but what do you call it? And, how do you find those people? And what is that? And, so I went on to Google, and I was like, people without children, losses, mothers, blah, blah, blah. And I found the term childless not by choice then, and then I found World Childless Week. It had just happened. It happens in September each year, and this was October. So obviously in the Google searches, then World Childless Week came up, and from there, that was then when I identified with that label. So it was roughly 1 year after I became childless not by choice that I found the label and went, oh, these are my people. So yeah.
Did you find comfort in knowing that there was a group of people that had all experienced the same thing?
Absolutely. So that very first Google search, or the Google search that came up with something, was then I found a webinar from World Childless Week, where two therapists were speaking, and pretending that they had been to a barbecue or something like that, and actually speaking around the question of who do you share what with and all of that type of stuff. And I was like, oh my god, these people are me. This is then yes. So from there, then it found hugely comforting, and that was actually what launched me into finding support groups, or founding a support group. We were in the pandemic, so that's kind of how Childless Life came around. Was then from there, I actually found reading stuff on Facebook and all that quite triggering. It was basically coming up with things that I hadn't thought of yet, and I found just reading everybody else's pain quite heavy. Whereas this format of kind of having some people having a chat, or for me then, I basically jump in and said, who would like to do a Zoom? We're all in pandemic, we're all in a lockdown, who would like to come on and we just have a chat around this together, sort of type thing. And that was kind of where my support groups were born, so to say. And from there, because I found it so healing. I did that for with the same people for about 9 months, and then I thought, oh, I wonder, if this was just a coincidence because of my grief, sort of type thing. And then I tried again. I was like, well, no, and that was then where everything came on from that. So yeah, basically, I found it really helpful. There's a kind of slogan around grief that we all grieve uniquely. Our grief is as unique as a fingerprint, but what we all have in common is for our grief to be witnessed, and I think that witnessing part is key to our healing. So finding other people like us is super important as part of that healing process.
Yeah. Next question. What are some of the misconceptions about childless people, especially those who didn't particularly choose it?
So one of them we've already discussed, which is, childlessness is only for those who have physically tried and practically almost died during the process of trying to have a child. Because there is this misconception that science can fix everything. So, there is that piece that then, did you really try hard enough? And I think we hear that voice loudly in ourselves sometimes as well. No matter, how much or how little we did, there's a pressure that we could have always done more. So, that's definitely one of them, that then, there's many paths to becoming childless. And the misconception is, around the people don't really understand the emotional weight of trying as well, that at some stage it's like, I need to let this go because it's going to literally kill me if I don't, sort of type thing. So it's then the emotional weight behind it is super heavy. The other things that then we've already touched on a little bit is, are you not over that yet? So, there's this phrase that kind of okay, well, wait a minute, yeah. And as I said at the beginning, it's a living loss. So it does evolve and change. And that can sound really depressing, that it's a living loss. I feel really comfortable. And, I don't use the label that I'm child-free at this moment in time, but I appreciate the benefits of not having children, but I still wanted them. So the depressing piece about the living loss is then it evolves, and sometimes you've got periods like I have just now where, I really feel that triggered. The last time I felt triggered was in the doctor's surgery in August last year. So that's then, 6 months ago, there was a trigger there. So I can kind of remember them, and the triggers then aren't as intense, don't last as long, all of that type of stuff. So you can go through, maybe it hasn't happened to me yet, but maybe you can go through years where you don't feel a trigger or whatever at all, and then the grief can come back as well. As I say, one of the most common ones is the grandparent era, is when all of your friends disappear again because their children are having children, and it's like, okay, everybody's part of this party that I'm not invited to, and that can bring back the grief and things again at that moment in time. So yeah, there's this living loss, and yeah, I don't know, maybe the other misconception that we've already touched on, as well as that word that I was speaking about earlier, which is it's a disenfranchised grief. So just because people aren't talking about it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt as well. So yeah, there's lots of things, that then people just don't feel comfortable talking around, and yeah, but many paths into it, and yeah, although it's not recognised in a way by society, then yeah, there is a grief involved in that as well. Quite often people say, how can you grieve something that you've never had, as well, and that can feel quite hurtful too, is then but yeah, it's definitely possible to grieve something that you've never had. Yeah.
It's interesting you said about the grandparent thing, because that's something that I think oftentimes as well with, people talking about kids, it's like, oh, but who's going to look after you when you're older? Or like, and it's interesting because a lot of like my peers and people that I know my age are having kids, and then, watching their kids growing up is also, Halloween parties or first day at school, or they got their teeth or
Yep.
glasses and like whatever it is.
All that living loss is changing. It's then
Yeah.
things that are kind of, yeah.
Yeah, but then, like you said, that's gonna happen again when those kids have kids, or when those kids, move on, and then again it is that living loss that you're still missing out on this thing that you really wanted. And I think that's again sort of the difference between that and the child free, because the child free, they don't feel like they're missing that thing because they didn't want it in the first place, maybe, I guess.
And the other thing that parents sometimes come back and say is, when you do touch on that piece about aging without children, but I never had my children to look after me when I was older. It's like, it wasn't part of my plan neither. It wasn't, 9 out of 10 cases. There's exceptions. Some people are like, I really did want this, I wanted that connection, sort of type thing. But in most cases, you don't think, I'm going to have a child, so I have someone to look after me when I'm older. That's kind of not the way our minds work in a way. But it comes quite quickly afterwards, or at some stage afterwards, it does come along and go, wait, but wait a minute, what is my plan? Because again, the kind of world is designed around that you will have someone out there to look after you when you're older. So that can come back as a, oof, I'm going to feel vulnerable at some stage in my life, and what are the options available for me? And, there's a lady called Jodie Day. God, I'm not getting anybody's names right today. Jodie Day, who then, she was one of the pioneers in the childless not by choice community. She came out with a group called Gateway Women, probably back in 2012 or something like that. And she's now, being the pioneering person that she is, she's now just reached 60. So she's starting to look at, that thing around ageing without children, and how, you can petition governments, and how you can then develop kind of like networks in your own community, so that you're kind of like all helping each other out, and it's like networks of multi-generations as well. And she's trying to kind of look at models there to say, how can we, because all of this stuff that you're doing just now, I'm in Spain, you're in Thailand, that works brilliant when we're at our ages of late 30s and almost 50, but when you physically need someone to bring you a meal round when you're older, or when you broke your leg or something like that, well, we're not going to be able to help each other in that way. So actually having a local support community is super important at some stage as well. So it's interesting to look ahead and see, what our elders are doing, and, how we can build on that and how we can support them too. So The interesting piece about this then is, as well though, is probably parents will never ever plan for their old age because they will rely on those children. They won't really think about it. Whereas, children can be born in Scotland and live in Spain and not be available or whatever as much and things like that. Whereas I see that we're much more thinking around this topic and much more, like I'm not even 50 yet and I have, thought quite detailed about this, which then probably parents don't get to until, there's a health scare when they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever sort of type thing. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, how, so I wouldn't like to call it an advantage, but we're definitely ahead of the game on that particular piece as well. So
I also wonder about financially, if we're a bit more like, oh, well, I'll need a certain amount of money to be able to help me, in care homes or whatever it's going to be. Whereas I guess if you have children, like you say, you might just automatically assume they're going to help you, even if, then they might live in a different country and not be there. But I think me and Jeremy at least are a lot more thinking about like, okay, well, by the time we retire, we would need X amount of money per month to be able to live, blah, 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 blah.
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm not a parent with children, obviously, but I don't know if people with living children are planning financially as much. I don't know.
Yeah, it's then, yeah. The other thing, is, again, kind of weaving in some benefits to all of this sort of type thing is then, if we do have property or whatever, if we decide to buy property, you might not, because you might decide to go travelling or whatever, like you and Jeremy are doing. But at the end of the day, who are you going to leave that to? So you have choices at some stage. It's like, okay, do I sell up and I move into rented accommodation? Or, how would I like to enjoy that myself rather than leave it to somebody else? Or, is there a charity that's really important to me? Or, some of that can be part of our legacy, or some of that can be just well, wait a minute, I do have this freedom and I do have this choice. Let me go and enjoy some of it too, sort of type thing. There's again a financial, I think it's called child-free wealth, which again, not everybody who doesn't have children is wealthy, would be another misconception to pop out there. But yeah, there's an organisation called Child-Free Wealth. It's a US-based organisation, so it's quite targeted at the US market. But he gives financial planning to people who don't have children as well. So it's like an interesting contact as well. Jay somebody or other, I don't know his second name to quote
Okay.
it. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
No worries.
Next question. What is the hardest part of accepting that you won't have living children in your future? And I purposely put living children in this, and I sort of wanted to ask you about the terminology there as well. Do you say living children, or do you just say without having children? Because I know that you have lost pregnancies. So I guess the first question is, like, do you prefer the living children or just children? And then also, what was the hardest part of accepting that you won't have children / living children in your future?
As I say, I don't really speak around this much with people that I don't know, and those that then do know me obviously know the topic really well. So it's more in these type of forums, or so I don't know if I really use either term in a big way, but both sit comfortably with me in different ways. I don't think I have a strong sensation in my body that, okay, she said children and they're not alive or living, and yeah, I don't know. So I think I'm quite comfortable with either one. So it doesn't at this stage of my healing journey, it feels comfortable to use either. So I think again it would just depend on the context as who the person was and things. What was the most difficult is so layered. I think it's difficult to pull out one thing that then really felt challenging, that piece about aging without children came really hard at me. I would say that, not longer after, it wasn't something I'd thought of for whatever reason, and not longer after finding the support groups and seeing lots of people comment about that, it was like, oof, this feels unfair in a way. It's like I wanted to have children. Here I am in a foreign country. My husband is an only child, and who will look after us? So that did feel like a really strong, heavy thing to handle. And to be honest, I still don't have the answers. I just feel more comfortable because, I'm 49. I could make the biggest plan in the world and, you know, see how much life has changed in the last 10 years. How's it going to change in the next 10 years, you know? So but somehow someone saying to me as well at that time is this the moment to really worry around that? It allowed me to think, what can I do just now? Okay, we'll write a will up and do things around that piece. I know what I need to do in the future, but just now is not quite the right moment as well. So I think, you know, that kind of brought me comfort around that stuff. But so that would be, you know, the aging without children piece that felt really heavy. Clearly I think the other piece was that loss of innocence that we spoke about the last time around the miscarriages and the pregnancy loss. You know, that felt really heavy as well, and lots of the what ifs and things around that side. But yeah, and then something that then I see commonly kind of happen was my experience as well is, you know, when we got the phone call from the doctor saying, you know, okay, you're not pregnant, and we knew that was the end of her journey and all of that piece, was then I think we often want to go, okay, if I can't have this, let me be free, let me go and travel and let me do stuff. And we want to jump over that grief in a way and just get to the benefits of not having children. And some people are more successful at kind of doing that for a while, but sooner or later the grief will pop its head up and say, listen to me. So for me, a big part and a big, you know, lesson out of it was really to listen to my emotions and to learn how to process those and how to hold that grief, and, you know, how to a lot of, you know, that year before I found support, what I really felt was like my life didn't have any value without having children. You know, there was a big hole there as to, and, you know, I kept trying to run away from that. And then when you sit down and you feel that and you really let it be, little by little, and I'm saying it in a very, very summarised way here, you know, it's like, you know, when you sit with that, you get therapy, you get help, you find support groups, and, you know, you go through the stuff on that. At the other side, it makes space for new things to start to grow. It then allows, you know, basically, it almost feels like the death of an identity. And then you kind of go through and come into to a rebirth at some stage. But there's a intermediate stage there of, well, I'm not that anymore. But what am I going to be? I don't know. And that feels uncomfortable as well. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's probably too much of an answer to your question, but
No, thanks so much.
so yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I completely relate to all of that. It's true.
Yeah.
The next one is, how does grief show up in unexpected ways for people who are childless not by choice, even years later? And I know we've talked about this with the living loss and
the grandparent piece that we spoke around.
yeah,
Medical appointments that we've touched on as well. So, you know, as I said, you know, last year, you know, my grief is fairly, you know, I don't hear it. It doesn't come up so much. It's been tended so much to in these 5 years that then, but, you know, I went for a medical appointment, and it kind of, like, the 15th of August here is a public holiday, and this was Friday the 16th, so it was kind of like an emergency appointment day, and I didn't realise that, and I kind of realised, okay, other people were having losses around me today, and that went, poof, that kind of felt really, and I just, you know, tried to hide on my phone at that moment in time and go, okay, this is not yours, like, whatever. So, you know, it can come up really unexpectedly in a million different ways. What I like to think is, you know, that grief when it does pop up, and obviously this is from, it can feel horrendous to start with, because it feels like, oh my God, there's one loss after another, and it's like an avalanche of things coming at you. So I'm sitting from a very privileged position at this moment in time of, you know, having the time and space to heal in a good way with lots of support and all of that stuff. But when it does come up, what I like to kind of think about it as, you know, it's like, okay, this popped up again. This is a part of me that still needs some love and attention and some healing. So it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe not everybody sees it this way, but I kind of like imagine like different little characters inside me, and that pregnant part of me popped up then to say, hey, you need some love and attention. You've forgotten to look at me, and because I work quite a lot with people childless by circumstances who have never had a pregnancy, sometimes it's uncomfortable to speak around that piece as well, because they wanted to become pregnant, so then they never had that. So it was probably the area that I hadn't spoke about so much. So when that popped up and said, hey, listen to me, then I could take that back into therapy and look at that, and then life is magic in some ways. That then phase people contact me about podcasts, and here I am speaking about you, and all of those things feel healing to me, to go back and go, okay, listen, I'm paying attention to that part of me that wanted healing last August, and here we are talking about it, and that's healing for me, healing for you, and hopefully healing for other people who listen to this as well. So yeah, it can be anything. It's the weirdest things. Seeing pregnant ladies is then something that can feel very triggering as well. But yeah, it can be, and that's the thing. It just, and that's why I said trigger, because it always catches us out by surprise. Is then the piece. But as I say, I like to think about it as, okay, this piece has popped up. What's it trying to tell me, and what do I need to look at?
Yeah. I heard that a couple of years ago about triggers, that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something within you that you need to, like I said, pay attention to, show some love to, question, whatever. Like, it can be triggers about anything.
Yep.
And it's just something within you that's saying, hey, we need to maybe look at that or focus on that or talk about that.
It's a little
just
alarm bell,
knowing.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little like, okay, that makes me feel uncomfortable or unhappy or whatever it is. But it's just a little like, oh, maybe we should look into that. And like, I think when you see it that way, it's not such a bad traumatic thing. Almost, it's almost just like, oh, okay, I need to just now be with myself and pay attention to that thing, if that makes sense.
Yep. And as I say, we are probably looking at it from several years worth of healing, so
Yeah.
it is, then it can feel really, really intense when it's like, yeah, every 5 seconds there's another trigger going off, and it's like, oof, give me a break, is then but yeah, so
That is very true. I just want to say as well, I'm going to share something. I've shared it a few times, but when I was going after the late term abortion due to medical reasons, whenever I saw pregnant people in the street, I wanted to physically attack them. Like, I wish I had a knife to stab their babies. And I know
yep,
that sounds horrific to say.
yep,
You're not supposed to say that. But I say it because I'm hoping that if somebody is going through loss and they feel that amount of like
Mm-mm-mm.
anger, despair, frustration, just like pure evil, like
Yep,
I just felt so awful in myself. Like, it does get better,
yep,
and triggers can then become like, oh, there's a pregnant person, fuck you, but that's it, kind of thing. It's not
yep,
like a rage where it's just like
yeah,
overbearing, which is
yep,
what I had
yep,
at
yep,
some point. So I'm not
and,
trying to say that, I've never experienced rage. I've never experienced this grief and like, look at me, I'm all healed and whatever. Like, no, I've had my fair share of triggers and shit going on, and like,
yep,
it is really
absolutely,
tough. So I'm glad you brought that up as
yep,
like, we're a couple of years later, so we're somewhat doing all right. Whereas I know that when
yep.
you're in the depths of it, it can just be horrendous.
Yep. And there are a couple of things that then I'll see if I can remember both of them. I'm scribbling down before. Yeah, cool. Fine. So there's that fantasy that you spoke about, and I think it's really important to pull that out as to, these are fantasies. We know that you're not going to actually do something with that, and it doesn't make you a bad or evil person to have these thoughts. Jealousy and that envy and that, life is so fucking unfair type thing. How come this person, and especially if that person in front of you is a freaking drug addict or something, and doesn't deserve to have a child, or already has 5 children, or whatever the case it may be, it's okay to have those fantasy thoughts, and it doesn't make you a bad or evil person, and it's then their fantasies, and that's it. So it's okay on that side. And the other thing that both Rosie and I have mentioned just now and several times is, hey, we've had this luxury of time. Time is weird with grief as well. So if you're one of those person that successfully could jump across to, hey, let me look at the benefits of that, and manage to shove it in a box, and once in a while you're sitting on that box and keep it down there, it's not going to explode. It can be 20 years, it can be 30 years later when that explosion happens. So grief stays there and waits in standby for you to be ready for that box to explode as well. So, if you're 20 years on or whatever, and you're listening to this and going, oh God, they're saying they're 2 years and 5 years in and they're feeling like better or whatever, I'm so broken, I haven't, no. It's then you were much more successful at us at popping it in that box. Our box just exploded much quicker than yours. And, we're in a period of time when there are fantastic, webinars, podcasts, and all this type of things which allow us to heal. Whereas 20 years ago, that stuff didn't exist. So, your grief was largely ignored. So I just want to mention that about the time thing. Time doesn't heal by itself. It needs those witnesses, it needs some love and support, and, basically it needs a lot of hard work on it as well. So,
yeah. I think one of my triggers, one of the recent ones, was during our conversation last time. I don't know if it was as much a trigger, but we were talking about naming our miscarriages, and then I just burst into tears. So if you haven't seen that episode, go and watch it. But I would it just completely took me over by surprise. I had no idea I was going to react that way, and then floods of tears, trying to be professional, trying to hold my shit together, but just to let you know, it does pop up, it does creep out of nowhere. You think you're doing fine for 6 months, and all of a sudden someone says something and you're in floods of tears and you can't stop it. So that's completely normal for anybody watching as well. We're not, oh my God, we're completely fine, and grief doesn't hit us. It does, and it smacks you in the face. And I think that's also that's so normal as well. It's part of the journey, it's part of the healing journey to feel what you feel
Exactly. And as I say, at 90 years old, something's going to come across and slap us in the face, and it'll be like, okay, here we go. So the thing is the more we get practice at dealing with it, the more skilled we are to go, okay, fine, how can I find that compassionate or that mothering part of me to sit and hold that part of me that feels injured? And how can I sit with it rather than push it away? That's the key to healing in some way, no matter what time you're looking at, sort of thing. So, yeah.
Oh, that was beautiful. Well said. Next question, number 6. What support exists already, and then what's the work that you do to help people who are childless not by choice?
So I've spoke around some different support organisations as I went through in a way, and how I found our community was through an association called World Childless Week, which is then, let me see if I can get her name, Stephanie Phillips set this up, and I think it's going to be the 9th year of World Childless Week this year. I am a very proud people's champion of 2024-2025 of World Childless Week. So as I found my way into the community, then it's a very proud moment for me. It means that people of our community have voted me for making a difference in the community and in their lives. So that's beautiful. So World Childless Week basically then have webinars. They have different themed days for 7 days the week that it goes, and usually the Monday is the our stories and such likes. And it ends on the Sunday with moving forwards and we're worthy and those type of things. So, and there's different themed topics that then, it might be men that are childless on the Wednesday, and that changes each year, or it might be people who are single and childless, and there's a different themes that happen on the different days. So that's absolutely wonderful resource, free to everybody forever, and lots and lots of webinars on there now. So that's fantastic. On my side, then I, as I say, I basically set up childless.life from my personal lived experience and in progress experience, because as I say, this kind of goes on forever. And what I do is I'm basically a coach and a grief therapist, and I'm childless not by choice. So from my lived experience, then I have kind of 3 different sort of support options. One I called the Healing Horseshoe, and people are like, why a horseshoe? Why not a circle or whatever? And it's because a horseshoe is a circle with a gap in it waiting for you to come in and join us. So, it's kind of like an invitation
Oh.
for you to come in and complete the circle in some way. So that is focused primarily on grief. So, basically when someone is struggling, we share the story, we go through kind of like loss ceremonies of sharing our losses, because quite often, we can't share our losses with, we try and chat to our best friend and they have 2 children, and whilst they're trying to understand, and they sometimes yes and sometimes no, depending on the best friend. But even with a lot of intent to understand, they haven't been through what we've been through. So it's like really finding. We're usually around 6 to 8 people in those circles. So it's a small intimate group where we share our loss, and we invite healing through on that side. There's a second group called Embracing Us, which then again came out of people going through the Healing Horseshoe and saying, okay, fine, I have really felt the grief and whatever. I'd love a break from the grief, but I don't want a break from you ladies. I want to continue in some way with the contact, the connection, because daily life by life, then things still do come up and whatever. Then there's different situations. I'd like to brainstorm together with people who get it about aging without children and all of those different things. So Embracing Us is a kind of support circle, more on the coaching side of it. So, in that coaching piece there. And then the other thing is one-to-one grief therapy and coaching as well that I do. I have basically also just kind of launched a new mini series that then will be on pregnancy loss, and it will be looking at then that piece of what I was speaking about earlier as to, we have been pregnant and we have an experience of being pregnant. So how do we invite healing there? And we have lost a child, and no matter how small or big that child was, we have lost that child at some stage as well. So they are, inviting healing into those 2 areas. Because as I say, sometimes in the groups, people feel a little bit like they silence themselves on that piece because other people haven't been pregnant. So, there it's a safe space to really go into the depths like you and I did in our stories the last session, without, being afraid that we're going to hurt somebody in the process. So, that's kind of... On top of that, there's things called the Childless Collective, which is an association that then, came out of Gateway Women I spoke about earlier, that then a lady in the States has set up, and she did a conference a couple of times, and it's a membership group. There's other podcasts like the Full Stop podcast, that then they go on and they've been again about 6 or 7 years now, and they have a back catalogue of lots of different interviews from different perspectives. So yeah, I think going on and Googling, childless not by choice, then I think there's a support option for everybody's choices now and whatever as well. As well, on World Childless Week, there's a directory of all the therapists and such likes there as well. So, for whatever reason, you don't want to work online, you want to work with someone locally in your community, then there's lots of resources out there now, which is really beautiful, because even 5 years ago, I think there was probably a handful of therapists, and now in the UK alone, I think there's 30 now is the last count that then it has. So yeah, so it's good that then there is support available.
I think as well, finding someone who understands your situation is crucial. I remember after the 4 losses, we then did embryo freezing, and we got the embryos tested to see if they also had Ellis Van Creveld, which is what the baby had where we had the abortion. So we were doing this testing, and at the time I signed on for BetterHelp and was assigned some random therapist. I remember fertility wasn't one of the things you can link. There was all addiction, marital issues, whatever. But I remember fertility was not one, and I was like, that's crazy. The amount of infant loss that happens, that surely should be one of the things. Anyway, long story short, got assigned to somebody, and I remember trying to talk to her about my emotions, about what was going on and all the rest of it. And she was sort of saying to me things like, well, I believe that every child is perfect, and basically, had I been in that situation, I would have had that baby because I would have loved them either way, and it doesn't matter what illness they have, because I was on about the testing and how I would feel if they have this sort of. And she was like, yeah, but you'll love your baby either way. I would have given birth to any child. And I just thought, oh God, you completely do not get it. Like, she just did not get it. And I was like, surely as a therapist, you're not supposed to be imposing your views on me, that especially when they're opposite to what I've literally just done and have a huge amount of trauma about. And like, I don't know. So I didn't go back to BetterHelp. I didn't even change the therapist, because I was just like, there's no option for somebody who understands infant loss, and especially like a late term abortion. That's like a whole thing in itself. And then doing the embryo freezing and not knowing if we're going to use them or not. And it was like this whole thing. And I was like, God, I wish I could just find someone who got it, who like knew what I was on about and would support me, versus saying really triggering things, being like, yeah, but you'll love your baby either way. And like, what? Yeah, even if they're in pain and die. And like, it was just like I was just like, what on earth are you doing? So I ended up leaving. But my point is, I think it's like it's crucial to find someone who gets it, because if you don't, you can be really, really hurt by what people say.
And pretty much the horror story that you've just shared, we all have one, and that's then why all of us therapists who went into this, basically, they went in from going, oh my God, I'm not going to let someone go through that again, is then the thing. So yeah, it's then, and again, nobody ever means harm, like our friends and family who, trigger us accidentally, whatever sort of type thing. The therapists, are then, but they've like, okay, well, fine, you're looking at a coach. Well, what are the alternatives? Paths to motherhood? No. The paths are closed. No, but look at adoption. Look at, and you're like, that's not what I'm looking for just now. I'm looking like, how do I live a happy and fulfilled life when I feel worthless and empty because I don't have a child, without a child? And yeah, some people just, can't get there is the thing. Or I also did have child-free support as well, and as I say, they were just so celebrating they couldn't understand my grief as to, here, look at the benefits. I'm like, you want to become a therapist or you want to become a coach and all these type of things. Well, a child would have dragged you down. Come on, now you're free and liberated to do these things. And it's like, so yeah, no,
Just
I hear
don't
you.
get it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole directory there of folks on World Childless Week. So for whatever reason, you yeah, go there would be my recommendation. So yeah.
You mentioned friends and family, and that's actually my next question. So how can friends, family, and strangers be more supportive of childless, not by choice people?
So I always kind of go into this as well, similar to what you mentioned. I can't remember the exact example you said, it was about asking, do you have children? I think going in there with the empathy that then I would have made a lot of the mistakes that then everybody out there in the world does, because, I also thought it was just kind of normal. Everybody wanted kids and would have kids and all of those type of things. So I definitely don't want to people bash the folks out there that then, don't know what to do, is then, because there's lots of loving, empathetic people. Primarily, you would even start with our parents or with our brothers and sisters or siblings and such likes as well, because they're the ones that probably can see, oh God, they're really struggling when we are struggling, and really don't know what to do. And sometimes the safest option often feels silence. It feels like it is silence, not to say or do anything. That can feel really, when we're feeling really empty and alone with it, that silence can feel really, really loud and really, really heavy. So I think that we're all so different as well, that there isn't a magic wand to say, do this, that, and the next thing, and your childless friend or family member will be fixed. No, I think the best thing is, ask them what they need, or just, I don't know. As I say, I did another webinar on this with World Childless Week, and one girl said the silence is different when, I say I need to go and dig the garden, I need to get in there and do something physical, and it's like, I'm going to come and dig the garden with you, or would you like me to dig the garden with you, sort of type of thing. And basically joining in on what they need. For me, I needed those deep and meaningful conversations, and but also recognising that probably my friends and family weren't the first place to go to for that, and finding other people then freed them up and allowed me to come back at a later stage in my journey to then explain it in a less emotional way to them and say, this is really how I'm feeling, and this is then what helped me, and this is then how I need you now. So I think there's various aspects of that, which is, try and find those support groups that then, people will get you just now, and that gives you a bridge back into your friends and family and back into your community without all of that heaviness. Whereas on the other side, I think the key thing is, ask them what they need. So one of the things that we spoke about, one of the perhaps biggest triggers for us is baby showers, pregnancy announcements, all of those type of things. So if you're perhaps thinking about having a child, speak to the person up front and say, hey, we're trying, and I know this is going to be difficult for you. How would you like, if we are successful, how would you like to know about that? Do you want me to tell you one-to-one? Because the worst thing is, being at a surprise party at a dinner and suddenly there's an announcement there and we're like not able to prepare for it in some ways. So, it's like, ask us, would you like me to send you a text message? Because sometimes that text message then can do the bit of, oh my God, I'm so happy for them, but I'm so bloody sad for me. And we can kind of get that sadness out in a private place and then go back and be happy for them. So, in those type of situations, it's brilliant if you can ask up front as to, how would you like to be involved in this? Likewise with things like baby showers, sometimes it's like, well, this is going to be too painful for them, I won't invite them. Well, that non-invite can feel just as painful. So again, what would you like? Would you like to come for like an hour? Would you like to come with a friend? It feels safe for you. Would you like to not come at all? There's no pressure. What would you like in this particular situation? I understand this is difficult for you, and how would you like to feel around that? But again, we can link in a webinar which has, a brainstorming thing around this as well, on the show notes. But my key takeaway would be, to ask the person what they need. And sometimes when we're really heavy in our grief, we don't know what we need as well. So that can sometimes feel like a burden as well. But offer things if that's the case. You've not been eating very much lately. Your favourite dinner is macaroni cheese. Can I make you some macaroni cheese and bring it across? I don't even need to stay. It doesn't matter. Or would you like just some company to watch a movie together? Or I don't know. Kind of give some suggestions. They'll soon tell you bugger off. They don't want that. But ask them if they're in a good place to answer. If not, just try and be with them and just say that you're there, and you want to support in whatever way that you can, and don't know.
So much good advice there. I love that. Two things that came up for me when you were talking. One of them, I remember after the termination for medical reasons, I had a house party. It must have been like 6 months later. It was a good while later. Had some friends over. I think there was probably about 6 couples, so probably 12 of us, maybe a couple of extra friends, I don't know. But they were all at our house, and one of my friends announced that she was pregnant at my party. I just remember just being like,
don't do that.
It's funny now to look back on. I remember at the time, my can't even speak. My heart was pounding. My hands got sweaty. I felt like I was going to cry, but I also I was so excited for her and so happy. But I was also just like, how dare you say that at my house? How dare you surprise me with this thing? Everybody's now talking about babies, like baby names. What gender do you think it is? How's your first trimester? What are you going to do about the baby bedroom? And then the whole evening was about this girl getting pregnant, and I was just like,
in your safe space of your home,
in my safe space that I can't even then be like, okay, party's over, Jessie's pregnant, you can all fuck off. I was just had to just be like, wow, amazing, yay, let's now talk baby names and genders and all this thing that I'm still fucking traumatized with.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I probably just got drunk that night and was like, fuck this, alcohol will solve it. Obviously it didn't solve it, but
yeah,
don't do that. If you're watching, don't do that to your friends. That was literally one of the worst ways she could have told me she was pregnant.
Yeah. It's kind of like the rule of, whilst you're at a wedding, don't announce your engagement because it's somebody else's wedding. It's the similar kind of, yeah. But again, nobody means the harm that they cause in these things. So
she just had no idea.
Yeah.
No idea. And then the other thing I was going to say, sorry, was that I feel like now when we see, because obviously we're traveling when we go back home and see family and friends that maybe we haven't seen for a little while, one of the main questions that I get asked is, so where are you at with kids? Are you having kids? What are you doing? I'm just like, I was talking to my husband about this. I often feel sick of it. I'm like, who cares? Like, ask me about my travels, ask me about my work, ask me about my projects, ask me about, like, there's so many different facets of me. Why do you
Yep.
care if I plan on having children or not? Like, why is that any of your concern? But then also, I understand because they know we've been through this loss.
Yeah.
They want to know, they want to be kept up to date. But I'm also just like, stop asking me that question. I don't care to answer every 6 months
Yeah.
where I'm at, because it's the same as it was 6 months ago. And if it changes, I'm probably going to tell you what's happening. If I start
Yep.
trying again, I'm probably going to tell you so that I have a support system in place.
Yep.
But I feel like that's oftentimes a topic that people love to ask me about. And I'm just like, get over it. Like, is that just me being like really aggressive for no reason? Or I don't know.
No. It's like one of the most common triggers for us as well. So, it's then, and yeah, with friends and family, but also with completely like new people that you just meet, is then it goes across like all of the spectrum from the random person on the train to basically our parents or whatever sort of type things. So it's so easy as well. It's like, hey, you know what's important in your life at this moment in time. Tell me about what's been making your heart happy at this moment in time, or something like that. Just some simple question as to what's making you tick at this moment in your life, and what's important, what's your hobbies, what's, like, I don't know, something around. But
What have you been watching on Netflix recently? What's your favorite film you've seen in the past 6 months? Like, just anything. But I know for a fact every time I go home and see people, that's going to be a question, and I'm just always like, oh God, can we not?
Yep. And that's then when we feel strong enough, it's just doing training on it and then seeing, so I'll promise if something changes, you'll be the first to know. So you don't need to ask me around this, is then
Yeah,
so it's
I need to start doing that. Like, if anything changes, I'll let you know. Until then, you don't need to ask me.
yep,
Like,
yep.
thank you.
Mm.
Okay, two more questions. I'll roll them into one.
Cool.
What helped your healing journey? I know we might have talked about this last time. We've talked a little bit today as well. And then also, what advice would you have for your younger self?
So, what helped my healing journey? I think we've touched on a lot of it indirectly through there. Basically, finding others who got it definitely is a big thing. Not trying to run from my grief and my emotions, but sitting with it, processing it there. And little by little, as well. So that was like a 2-second thing. So that means, shout, swear, get angry, get jealous, speak about your jealousy, speak about all of that. But there's a whole mismatch of like what feels like horrible stuff to go through, and just grief lives in our body. Get it out of our body is a thing, and it takes time. So recognising as well that it is a living loss. For me, this helps a lot. So, last summer, 5 years in, whatever, and suddenly I'm triggered. I'm not like, oh my God, I'm back there again, whatever. It's a living loss. This is completely normal and acceptable that then, I have this. This is a healing thing, experience it's inviting something, whatever, and, sit with it then. So it does go from that, what Rosie was saying earlier, of the fantasy thinking and imagining almost strangling people. We've all been there. To okay, lighter sort of type thing on the waves are not so crashing, and imagining that sea. It goes from the stormy days to calmer days, but waves can come along at any time. So definitely around those things definitely helped. I think as well, it's giving space for other parts of our identity to pop up as well. When we've either, had the chance to try to become pregnant, or, we're hoping to find our partner, or we're hoping our health is going to get better, or whatever scenario it may be, somehow, you know, if we're to think about of a pie chart and our identity, suddenly like 75%, 80% is taken up by that motherhood thing. It kind of becomes an obsession, or especially, you know, treatments and those type of things that then, you know, we can get into. So when we, you know, have space to people that understand our grief has been witnessed, you know, we can really get it out. It frees up space for other parts of our identity to come along. So I think it's really important to mention, you know, that grief and gratitude, or grief in life, or whatever labels you want to put on that, these two things can coexist together. So you don't have to be, you know, completely over your grief neither, to go and join a choir or whatever, just whatever little snippets give you peace at this moment in time. For me, as I say, it was during a pandemic, so I'm not arty at all, but started to kind of like do paint by numbers, drawings or whatever sort of type thing. I then started to do some tapestry things and whatever, but all of that, like artistic stuff, which I don't classify myself artistic, was healing in itself and whatever as well. And then, yeah, so whatever way you can kind of get your emotions out, or for me, getting those emotions out was super key. Realizing that it was a living loss, finding others, and all of those things were key to my healing. I've done the exercise. I haven't done the current Instagram. You know, I make myself for a coffee type thing, and recently, but I've done the you know, lots of. I speak about those parts that we have in us, and you know, that 32-year-old part that I spoke about the last time, that, you know, announced it, you know, at that at the retreat, that then I wanted to be a mother, you know. So kind of going back and hugging her, and just, you know, giving her lots of care and attention and things, and you know, all felt very healing to me as well. What advice would I give at this moment in time to my younger person? I guess it's just more or less what I've said, you know, as in, you're allowed to shout and swear and have those fantasy thoughts and all of that type of stuff when triggers come up. Yeah. It's like I probably did go back and speak to her at some stage. I don't know, because I heard a whisper in my ear about a year into the journey saying, perhaps, just perhaps, you can be happy again, sort of type thing. And it was like, so I don't know, I feel like my older self did go back and whisper in her ear at some stage. And whilst that felt very, very fragile and very, very delicate and didn't feel quite true, somehow some little snippet got put inside me and said, you can do this, you'll find your way through. Cry all your tears, shout all your anger, whatever, and you know, it is definitely possible to feel, you know, like you have a fulfilled life without children. Even people, you know, like us, who really wanted that. So so perhaps, I don't know, I've waffled there again, but perhaps that thing of going back and telling her, yeah, it is possible to have a fulfilling life and not have children, but the pathway to get there is, you know, expressing all of those emotions that are there, and yeah, take your time to do that.
Well, that was beautifully said. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome.
I think I needed to hear that as well. Is there anything else you would like to add on to the end of this podcast? Anything we haven't quite covered, or anything you just want to add on to the end?
I don't believe so. I just like to thank everybody if they have managed to get through the hour and a half of this particular session again. So we are such wafflers. So yeah, thank you to whoever who's out there is listening as well. You know, you're not alone, and yeah, I hope that you find this comforting. And a huge thank you to Rosie for bringing out this platform and for, you know, sharing, allowing us to share our experiences. So yeah, just a huge thank you to you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on again and sharing your story and for sharing your expertise. It's funny because, like we said at the beginning of the recording, we both said, right, this will be a quicker one. We've got 10 questions. We'll we'll zip through it. And then we are like an hour and a half later, we're still chatting. But yeah, if you have watched this whole episode, thank you so much for watching. I will leave all the information, all the links, everything in the description box down below, so you can go and find everything. If you want to work with Sandra, obviously that information will be there as well. your Instagram, your website, everything. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on again for a
Thank
second
you.
time and for
Yeah.
talking to me about this.
Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.